All right. It is 5 minutes after, and we don't want to keep folks long. I know everyone has a full schedule of Zoom meetings for today. For today, so we want to go ahead and get started with our conversation. As people come in, we will get them up to speed in terms of where we are. But I wanted to take an opportunity to introduce myself. I'm L. Joy Williams. I am the project director for the 2021 racial redistricting process at CLSJ, which hear more about as we go through this process this afternoon. And I'm so delighted that you registered and you are participating in this introductory conversation about redistricting. As you know, some of you may know in the room, the process of redistricting, yes, is a detailed, lengthy process, but that is why CLSJ is offering community conversations such as this, as well as, which we'll talk about later, in-depth training opportunities for members of the community, representatives of community organizations, to become well-versed in the redistricting process, and also to actually participate in the process. We weren't taught that redistricting is something that we could have our hands on and our hands in, that we can actually participate in the process. And the Center for Law and Social Justice, particularly as its focus on people of African descent in this state, want to make sure people have that information to do so. So I'm going to step out of the way really quick to bring up the interim director of the Center for Law and Social Justice, Laree Daniel Favors, who will talk a bit more while I'll share the screen of information about the Center for Law and Social Justice. Laree?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you so much for that, Joy. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, and hopefully you do not also hear my children in the background. I cannot guarantee they will not make a cameo appearance. They've just finished virtual school, and like all of you who have children, I am parenting while working right next to my second grader. So I want to start by welcoming every single one of you. It really is an honor to be able to speak with you all and to see so much interest in this presentation. We have gotten requests not only from everybody in every Black community in New York City, but we've gotten a lot of, as you can see from the chat, interstate interest in what's happening. And I think it is clear that as a result of what we have experienced collectively as people of African descent, what we are experiencing politically, socially, health-wise, as it pertains to our existence in this country, we are certainly far more poised for active civic engagement. And I'm very excited to have an amazing team that I work with at the Center for Law and Social Justice. And for those of you who are meeting the Center for Law and Social Justice for the first time, CLSJ, as we affectionately call ourselves, is a racial justice law center that was created in the 1980s and really in response to police brutality and systemic racial oppression. Our mission is to address racial justice issues by providing quality legal advocacy, conducting community education campaigns, facilitating research, and building organizing capacity on behalf of New Yorkers of African descent and the disenfranchised. And we engage in that work in a variety of ways, both initiating advocacy projects and litigation, as you can see on the screen. We have a number of research projects that we conduct, and I'll be passing the mic and happily introducing our Director of Research for Redistricting in just a moment, and providing community education and training on behalf of and in collaboration with community partner organizations. And this project, the Redistricting Project, is, I guess, the subsequent phase to the project that many of you came to know us through, which was our 2020 Census Justice Project, wherein we launched a 3-year campaign to frame the census as a racial justice issue. And this project and what we'll be doing with redistricting, which we will talk about a bit more, is a continuation of that work. We often said during the census cycle that the census was about money, power, and respect. It was about determining how and where, from where we would get access to equitable resources and political power and representation. The census data that we talked about so vitally is what's at issue now in redistricting. And so without giving away the entire story, because we have a lot of powerful information that's going to be presented for you today, just wanted to say it is my privilege to sit in this seat as interim executive director. As an institution, this will be our 4th redistricting cycle. And we have been very successful in years past at organizing our community to not just know what redistricting is, but to effectively engage in the redistricting process and to ensure that our communities are as civically prepared and engaged as possible. And as we have done in the past, we are continuing to work in collaboration. So those of you who are here in the New York City area, you're going to hear a lot of information about how you get involved, about how you can prepare your local community, your borough for what is coming. We invite you to partner with us. Joy and Dr. Zalima Blair will be sharing more about partnership opportunities going forward. But we are just excited about this process, and we're excited to see New Yorkers of African descent really take the horns and take the bull by the horns and really engage in leadership within parameters that we determine and civically in ways that we think is best suited for our needs. So I am going to pass it back to our amazing redistricting project coordinator, L. Joy Williams, and the distinguished Dr. Zalima Blair, who not only serves as the chair of the Public Administration Department at Medgar Evers College, but also leads our research and map drawing teams for redistricting. And so, y'all, if you're not familiar with Center for Law and Social Justice, you should get to know us. We're doing the work, and we invite you to do it alongside us. And so, with that, I am going to pass the microphone back to L. Joy Williams, who is going to lead us into the next segment, and we'll then be hearing from Dr. Zalima Blair. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you so very much, Laree. And just to give everyone the heads up of what we're going to cover today, we already were welcomed by our interim executive director, Laree Daniel Favors. I'm going to introduce to you an amazing researcher, Dr. Zalima Blair, who will take us through the presentation, getting us ready. And remember, this is just a primer getting us ready for the redistricting process. And then I'll come back at the tail end for an activity and how else you can get involved. So I want to take this moment right now to introduce our the person who is heading up our research team for the redistricting process. Dr. Zalima Blair is the redistricting research director for the Center for Law and Social Justice for this 2021 redistricting cycle. She is also chair of the Public Administration Department at Medgar Evers College. She is the author of Participation at the Margins, Is It Race or Class? And her research focus primarily focused on low-income populations and their participation in the political process. And fun fact, I should have made this, Dr. Blair, I should have made this like a question for a free t-shirt or something like that. She is the only faculty member at Medgar Evers College to have both a JD and a PhD. Look, Black women lead, okay? In case you did not know, I'm going to hand over the sharing screen to Dr. Blair as she shares the information and takes us through for a few minutes an introduction to redistricting. Dr. Blair?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thank you, Al Joy, as always, for giving in for Laree, our wonderful director for the Center for Law and Social Justice. As they both explained, we'll be taking you through the process. This is an overview, if you will, of what redistricting is all about. And if most of you do not know, it begins with the census. So we had a lot of big hoopla about what the census was about and what we were going to do with the census. And that is because without the census, we cannot redistrict, we cannot reapportion, we cannot draw districts, and we cannot have one person or one vote. The Census 2020 was about counting every living person in the United States, the 5 territories, at the location. That means wherever they were residing as of April 1st of that year, that is where they were to be counted. A lot of times people get undercounted and sometimes they get overcounted. Unfortunately for us, our communities do not get overcounted a lot, but we do get undercounted a lot. And the reason why this matters most is because our representation is at stake. How we draw districts, depending on who, how we represent, how we vote for individuals in the process, it all begins with the census. We don't get to make up for it like with other census surveys, as we do with the decennial census. There are no deviations. We don't get to say, oh, we were in a pandemic, and so we have to say, let's supplement what it would have been had we not gone through it. This is what the actual count is. So if we only count 60 or 70% of our communities as what we thought the case was, then that's what our numbers shape out to be. That's how much federal dollars we get. And that's how much we include in every city, state, and federal district that we draw. So as we previously stated, for reapportionment, we only have 435 seats in the US House of Representatives. We wish we could increase as the US population increases, but we can't. So we take, no matter how much, unless a law changes, that 435 seats are, we have to take it and divide it. And it is reapportioned, meaning that every state gets at least one member of the House of Representatives. So a state like Delaware, Rhode Island, et cetera, they will get one. So we get one for each state. And then depending how fast our population grows, then each state, according to the population size, gets an additional seat until we hit, and they subtract that population for whatever the count is, until we hit 435 seats. So you may not see it as clear as it's coming out now, but when you continue along our 6-week presentation and training, you will get to see in a digital format how that shapes out. The last round, New York State only increased by, or decreased by 2%, so we lost 2 seats. Ohio was another state that lost seats. So we are expecting to lose another seat, and we're hoping we don't lose 2 seats. So now that the census process is over and all states are in the process of receiving their census data, we are beginning the process of redistricting, which is the redrawing of federal, state, and local political boundaries following the 2020 census. As we stated, this is the most important civic act that we could have done, right? Be counted at the location of our residents, no matter our age. So children under 5 are often undercounted, and we hope that, you know, people really got the message that this time around that they counted even, you know, unborn individuals at the time that they were pregnant. So good data, we need it because we know that data is used for different things and different reasons. Just take all the data that we were counting during the whole protest movement over the summer. It's the key to reducing poverty, improving our health, political stability, and strengthening economies worldwide, including ours. And let me just say this, all over the world, if any of you are from another country or citizens or have dual citizenship, census is conducted around the world. It's not just in the United States. But we use this to make good policy as it affects our community. So why understanding it is so important? Data is information. And so information is knowledge, and it is how knowledge is constructed. It is how power is assigned. If we have good data and we find ourselves in a discrepancy, we are able to make policy to take ourselves out of it. But if we don't have good data, we can't. And so this is how knowledge is generated and how intersectional forces such as race, gender, age, and class all come together, and how we found out the truth about certain matters. So census totals help determine the amount of funding. The Census Bureau data is to distribute more than $1 trillion in funds. Okay, what does that mean? A lot of our programs to serve low-income individuals, such as Medicaid, which is the largest one, school lunch, everybody knows about by now, about the pandemic EBT, about food stamps, and on, farmers market. This is all from our total census numbers and how that fund is distributed. It helps with planning, informs a wide range of government, business, and nonprofit decision-making to determine the needs for roads, schools, and other public sector investments. So after-school programming, a lot of nonprofits are based on after-school programming. That's an example, how we plan, how we target, how we open up, how we do any type of business as it pertains to, as Joy referred to, your neighborhood. In the beginning, she said, put whatever neighborhood you live in. If you notice some deficiencies in your neighborhood, the census can be used to plan better. Emergency response. Who would have thought that this would have been year 2 of responding and us not having enough data to respond accurately? And more importantly, we are noticing that year after year, now every single year, our area is receiving or experiencing a different emergency, whether it's a hurricane, a superstorm, the virus, et cetera. We all have to respond to an emergency. It's not just certain areas of the country anymore. And our expectations depend on it. Housing, that's an emergency we're experiencing, right? Homelessness, so that's good. Business, et cetera. So data is key for all of this. And the Census Bureau doesn't only have the decennial census, they have other surveys that are sponsored by different agencies. So for example, HUD produces good data for affordable housing or where to develop, for example. So as stated previously, this is about money to states and localities. And so an accurate census count ensure that funding is equitably distributed for numerous programs. I mentioned Medicaid and other anti-poverty programs, but especially with special education and how we advocate for our children, how we advocate for Head Start, how we advocate for Title I funding, and that is, of course, to reduce or level the playing field, if you will, for anything else. Let me go back a minute. So going forward, apportionment, which is the point that we are in. I think New York State just received their PL, Public Law 94-171 data yesterday for how we will redistribute 435 seats in the House. And we're focusing a lot on the congressional level as opposed to state and local, but for the sole purpose really, because congressional redistricting takes place first. And so the state legislature has to approve those maps. So apportionment is about the state population counts, and that is very important because congressional districts has to be the exact size all around. And so the last time our count was roughly around 325 million people. And so divided by that, we would know by the 50 states, et cetera, we would know exactly how much is supposed to, each district is supposed to be. So last time we had about 717,000 individuals per congressional district. If my district is at 717,000, your district has to be exactly 717,000 or can only deviate by one person. Okay, we're really strict on, or the law is really strict on congressional districts. So after the 2020 census, Southern and Western states are expected to gain seats and political clout at the expense of states in the Northeast and Midwest. Lots of people left New York, have been leaving New York, and will continue to leave New York. I don't know, housing issues, a lot of different issues, but that's why an accurate count is really, really important. So the very first data from the census will be apportionment population counts, which I just mentioned. And that was supposed to, we were supposed to know December 31st, but again, a lot of things were pushed back. So redistricting. The constitutionally mandated redrawing of federal, state, and local political boundaries every 10 years following the census. Okay, for congressional districts, it's the apportionment clause of Article 1, Section 2 of the US Constitution. And as I stated, it is supposed to be equal. And for state legislative districts and for local districts, we try to only go deviate by 10% from the from one end to the other. So the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment requires that districts be substantially equal, but some say that 10% in population from one district to the next is a safe standard. So two different state legislative assembly district or state senate districts, one may have minus 5%, that's just obvious, and one might have above plus 5% for a maximum deviation of 10%. Doesn't always shape out that way, especially at the local level. Sometimes it's a negative 1%, and sometimes it's a positive 9%, if you will. But this year they're trying to make it so that it is -5 + 5. So it is important because depending on how voters are kept together, communities of interest, remember that terminology, may or may not be able to elect their representative of choice, one that is responsive to their community's needs, agenda, and public policy concerns. With communities of interest, we want to make sure that our culture, if you will, is kept together, or we live as close to individuals who share an important interest as much as we do. So how districts are drawn can either keep communities together, strengthen communities, or separate them. But know that if we do not pay attention and that if they're completely separated, it is hard to have a decent quality of life. It's hard to elect someone of your choice, and on and on. And so the process goes down the hill from there. So we want to pay attention. Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to chime in really quickly because I'm getting a couple of questions in the chat. So I just want to just clarify one thing. I am not a researcher, as you know. I am a lawyer. I'm a racial justice lawyer. So when Dr. Blair starts going on into the research of it, my eyes sort of take on a frightened deer in the headlights look. For those of you who are wondering, the +/- 5, ± numbers that she was talking about, that's in relation to population. So what you may have happening in your states is that the districts that are predominantly Black districts might have a larger number of, within that ±5%, might have a larger number of people packed into one district. And districts that are, say, less of color, districts that tend to be whiter, might have a smaller number of people put into that district. Why does that matter? Because the fewer people I, as an elected official, represent in this hypothetical, the more responsive I might be able to be, the more effective I might be able to be, the fewer people I have to listen to as an elected official. If there are significantly greater numbers of people per representative in Black districts, then Black communities tend to be disempowered legislatively when it comes to pressing forward our agenda. So if you're like me and you're not a researcher and you feared math and that's why you went to law school, don't tell nobody, then just know that population size is really significant. So I just wanted to clarify that for some folks in the chat. Thank you,
Thanks,
Dr.
Lori. I'm sorry I'm not paying attention to the chat as much as I should be, but Lori explained it quite well. And it's all, yes, about responsiveness, but also about resources shared and how much resources can be divvied out throughout the district. So I mentioned before after-school programs, for example, or I mentioned parks and recreation, et cetera. These are the types of things that we think about, and oftentimes undocumented immigrants are not counted. And so that also puts a strain, I don't want to say put a strain, but puts, moves to more so about undercounting and may increase our population deviation stats, if you will. So we explained why it is important, and we talked about the 435 seats. And so this is some important language: apportionment, reapportionment. This is done every 10 years. Again, it's based on population, how many representatives a state will receive. Gerrymandering refers to the manipulation. And this is what we're all sitting here wondering: how do we prevent gerrymandering or the dilution of some of our powers in these legislative boundaries? Malapportionment, assigning unequal numbers, which is what we just explained about the population deviations of people to districts and making some votes worth less than others. So a good example of this is group quarters. We know that there are homeless shelters. We know that there are prisons. We know that there are foster homes, et cetera, on and on and on. And so the biggest one was the prisons, because we know a lot of our prisoners or incarcerated individuals, lots don't have life sentences. And so that is not their permanent address. Yet whole districts were drawn based on prison populations. So around about 2012, a group of state legislatures came together to ensure that this was done so that prisoners will be counted at their home address. because they all come home, as a book is called by Jeremy Travis. So they all come home. And so the resources are not there when they come home. Why? Because it depends on the census count and the census data, and the resources that are distributed to the communities matter. And so our numbers and our proportions and our population counts could decrease if, you know, community individuals are not counted where they permanently reside on that census day or census year. So a lot of that happened in previous rounds, but this round we're taking it seriously and into consideration. And in fact, an updated file is often given to states on prison population, and New York will be paying very close attention to that this year. So malapportionment oftentimes dependent on these quote unquote group quarters, the plus and minus 5%, 10% that I spoke about previously. So why do we create districts? Identify a community that an elected government official must represent everywhere in the US candidates. So we have some special elections going on now that depends on districts. Sometimes you wonder, why is it that no matter how much we vote, people like us don't get elected? And it all comes back to redistricting. Sometimes your communities are cracked, meaning that the communities of interest are not kept together, and that it appears that your district may be a majority of a race or ethnicity, but it actually, the way it's drawn, it is not. So you may see that you're surrounded by people looking like you in your district, but the way the lines are drawn is not the case. And so you can never elect someone of your choice because that's not how the boundaries are shaped. This is about equalizing districts. Again, one person, one vote, the population counts. Every decade, new district lines are drawn to equalize districts because people move. We move for a variety of reasons, mostly social, now economic, and people even move for political reasons. You may say, I want to run for office somewhere, so I'm going to move and make that my area that I live in, and I'm going to register to vote there. So people move, and they move for those political, economic, and social reasons. They want to be close to family, or it's cheaper in a particular area, or they have a better quality of life. And so we have to normalize that. And it maintains communities, that important terminology that I've been talking about, communities of interest, to be represented together. So there are power in numbers. So you can advocate if you have similar interests to your elected officials about particular public policies. And so districts must be politically fair, and it must protect our interests and our local community boundaries. So everyone has particular corridors that they live close to. For me, I'm in the Crown Heights, Prospect Lefferts Gardens area. So Empire Boulevard, Nostrand Avenue, for some in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Fulton Street, those are important corridors. If you're in the Bronx, Gun Hill Road may be an important corridor. If you're in Harlem, Adam Clayton Boulevard, Junior Boulevard may be an important boundary, or 125th Street, Lenox Avenue, et cetera. So you have to respect these community boundaries, if you will, these shopping areas, these schools, these religious institutions, so that you can advocate together. And so the state legislature are responsible for drawing these districts. In New York now we have an independent commission, which we'll get to shortly, but for years and for decades, it was just the state legislature. They still have to approve the plan, but the state legislatures are in charge of drawing districts, but they often commit the cardinal sin of gerrymandering. In other words, they draw the legislature so that they have a longer political life, so that they remain in power and that the districts represent who they choose the voters that they want to represent. So they may crack districts or pack districts in order to assist their personal re-elections. And so it's important that states establish independent commissions. So this is the first year New York has an independent commission. And so why do we care so much about gerrymandering? If you were paying close attention to the last few presidential elections, you will see that we were worried about having control of the House, and worried about winning those House races, and worried about how much votes each president received from the Electoral College, et cetera. So in the past, or currently, 342 House races were considered not competitive. Okay, that means that they just won their seat handily and that they were able to control a lot of the issues in Congress. And so that became an issue, especially when you're considering healthcare reform and education reform and a lot of other issues. Now a stimulus bill, right? 24 truly competitive elections, that's very small. And so now we have another opportunity to correct this now that people are more engaged and becoming more adept and acute to this type of knowledge. So maps are drawn based on the census and the elections. So here's some of the criteria as we've been focusing on: population equality. We want to make sure that all the districts are of equal number depending on the census count. That the districts are drawn in a compact fashion. What does that mean? Usually it's like a naked eye test. You know, if it looks like a nice little neat puzzle, it's sort of good to go. And it's really, there's a lot of different mathematical formulas to measure this. And it's usually by the ratio, or sometimes the circumference of a circle is used, et cetera. And the higher the ratio, the less likely the district is deemed compact. But you want to make sure that it's drawn in a nice manner and that it looks decent to the naked eye, sort of in like a square position or a circular position. Contiguity is really about making sure that we can get from one end of the district to another and that the district is kept together. We want to preserve these county lines, but if we can't, even if the district is separated, and I'm sort of doing contiguity and preservation of counties along in the same realm. So even if the district is separated, let's say by a body of water, we want to make sure that that the district is still connected by a bridge of some sort. So some congressional districts or representatives, elected officials, represent parts of Brooklyn and Manhattan, for example, or parts of Manhattan and the Bronx. If there is a body of water that separates these two counties or these two different areas, there has to be a bridge that connects those two counties, or that district keeps that district intact. Preservation of communities of interest. And again, communities of interest, I can't stress how important this is because this is how the lay person understands redistricting. If we have similar interests, whether it's along economic lines, whether it's along religious lines, whether it's along local economic development, as long as our community is kept together, that we live as close to each other as possible so that we can advocate, for example, for a business improvement district. We can advocate for either more or less schools or more classroom space or something of that matter, that our communities of interest are kept together. So it's not just along racial lines, it could be language. For example, our kids can go to the same schools, we go to the same church, and of course, pay attention to those corridors. Okay, so we want to also preserve cores of prior districts. So sometimes we look at, when map draws, we look at, previous boundaries and say, well, let's start from here before we look at anything else and see how this shapes out. We want to avoid pairing incumbents. That means two elected officials should not be drawn in the same district. And prohibition on favoring or disfavoring incumbents, candidate, or party. That's really about gerrymandering, right? We want to make sure that we don't favor or disfavor, that we try to just rely on the data, and we try to do it in both a quantitative way, the census data, but and also there will be a chance for the public, for public input, and we call that qualitative data, so that it's done in an objective way, so to speak. So here's the state redistricting process. So we have both a majority party, Democrat controlled, and a minority party, Republican, and each set pair in both state houses, both the assembly and in the Senate, they get to appoint two. So two are appointed by the Senate president, two are appointed by the assembly speaker, two are appointed by the Senate minority leader, 2 appointed by the Assembly Minority Leader. And that makes up 8. Those 8 get together and appoint 2 additional members, and 5 is needed for a quorum to have a meeting, public meeting. I should add that these 2 that is appointed by the 8-member majority, they should not have been registered either Democrat or Republican in the last 5 years. So these are the 8 members, and then 2 others were appointed, and they must look like New York State. So we have to have language, racial minority representation, ethnic representation, and so on and so forth. We try to round it out that way. So there is a public input process. There is public map submissions. The state will have a process where, and a lot of things are done online now. You could even start playing with how different technology is used in the redistricting process. We normally use certain tools, and we'll get to that during our 6-week training, but there is a public map submission that you can, on your own, figure out your communities of interest and start playing with the boundaries and say, hey, this is how I think the community could be drawn. A district should be drawn, for example. My bus lines may not run together, et cetera. I may not have a hospital in my district, on and on. This is really about shaping your communities of interest and about speaking up for yourself and your community. My apologies for these notifications. So this is about speaking up for your community and about speaking up for yourself and limiting the amount that others can speak for you by doing your own public map submission, by participating in the public comment and testimonies. And in fact, before any maps can be drawn, so proposed maps made publicly available for comments, they must complete this process 30 days before so that you can see it and have an opportunity to attend and critique it. So they have to submit the maps to you 30 days prior, and then you look at it and you say, hey, this doesn't look good to me. Our communities is based on fishing, for example. So we need to make sure that that's not broken up. Or our community is based on restaurants. And so we need to make sure that that area is not quote unquote cracked. So you have the opportunity in layman terms to go, and they do one in each borough and each time, and they resubmit it, et cetera. So you have a couple of chances to input, if you will. And so this allows citizens to petition the courts in a citizen-initiated review process and review and approve plans. Many lawsuits that happen actually happen on the part of the voters. You know, the voter may say, we don't consider this a one person, one vote map, and so we're going to challenge this process. And it's taken very seriously. So I want to make sure that you understand that there is a process for that, that there are advocacy organizations like ours that participate in those particular processes. I might be getting a little ahead of myself, right, Laurie? And
Dr. Blair, I'm glad you just said that. You must have been reading my mind. One of the things I wanted to say was that this part of the process is very New York specific. So those of you who have joined from California, from North Carolina, Ohio, other places, there may be a very different process where you are located. So this is very New York specific. In the class that we're going to be launching in February, that really is a 6-week course that does a deep dive into all of this. That too will have some general information, but that will also be geared towards the New York City and state process. So take these notes, but take them with a grain of salt, and then follow up with people in your own jurisdictions as to how they are doing it. And just in terms of time, Dr. Blair, we are running short on time, so I know you have a few more to get through before we hear from Joy again. So thank you so much.
Yep. So I am at the end. We did some census projections, and while all counties are expected to increase, we found that the increase may not always be favorable to the minority community. New York is expected to go up as much as 9.1 million after we adjust for the undercount for undocumented immigrants, which was had a big scare about the citizenship question. So that was, taken into consideration during our projections. And Kings County is expected to increase, but our Black population is expected to decrease. A lot of our Black population moved to the Bronx, and so that's an expected increase of 10.2%. Queens and Manhattan, Manhattan stabilized with the Black population. Their population didn't increase, it didn't decrease either. Queens, of course, has a big increase and is almost near Brooklyn, but not leading Brooklyn just yet. I'm a little bit biased. So take a look at the New York City Black population projection. We have a decrease in Kings County. We have an increase in the Bronx by 21%, New York 1%, give or take, increase. Queens, a 9% increase, in Staten Island, a 22% increase, but that is the least populous of the boroughs. So we know that there is room for growth always there. But what was really eye-catching was the migration from Brooklyn to the Bronx in terms of the Black population. And we talked a lot about communities of interest. So I will actually turn it over to Joy, to Al Joy to continue from there.
Thank you so much, Zalima, and thank you so very much for the information that you presented to us, which is really important. I'm going to jump in here and give folks an activity to participate in. Just before we get to Q&A, wanted to take an opportunity to, I guess what we call the spread your shake your legs out and your arms out from there. We are going to have an opportunity for Dr. Blair to come back to answer some of your questions. You can, if you have questions now, you can certainly put them in the chat, and then we'll be able to use your questions to come back to answer that. But right now, I just want to share really quick with you the activity about a community of interest. Dr. Blair talked about just several times about communities of interest, and communities of interest are what is important for us as individuals to give researchers like Dr. Blair and others who are participating in this process information about our community. And so you don't have to be a statistician. You don't have to have gone to school for 10 years in order to contribute to this process. Communities of interest, as she mentioned, can be about the local economy. It can be about shared, shopping districts or boundaries or areas. So we're going to take this opportunity to do a little activity. The first thing you're going to do is determine your district lines. So I'm going to share this link in the chat. Otherwise, you can see it up on the screen. You're going to go to mygovnyc.org. I just shared it in the chat. If you know what your districts are already, kudos to you. You get a star on the top of your report card. And not who represents you, but the actual district number, right? Because your district is by number, not just about the person who represents you. So this is your congressional district number, your state assembly district, your state senate district, your council district, and even your community board. You want to have that information on hand as we go through this exercise to know where you fit in. Earlier, when you joined in and we had you put in the chat what neighborhood that you're calling from, notice that we didn't have a list of neighborhoods for you to pick. We wanted you to define what your neighborhood is and also what your community is. That, as Dr. Blair mentioned, is really important because where people live, what they call their neighborhood, what their boundaries are, is something that you get, that information you get from people on the ground, people who are living day to day in communities. All right, does anybody want to share in the chat their district lines? If you've taken the opportunity, taken the time to go to the web link, you could share it in the chat, what your district lines are. Let's see, who gets the next star? Lavrie, do you know your district lines?
I am staring at them right now.
And it actually, if you're using the site that I'm talking about, it'll show you, Dr. Blair, it shows them a map of their district, right? So it not only gives them the district number, but it shows you the map and the how the district is drawn. And if you live in certain areas, maybe your district is drawn in a way that, as Dr. Blair mentioned, where using that eye test, you look and see, oh, this is a great, it's a puzzle piece, it fits, it's great, right? Or do you live in a district that is jagged and looks like it has a whole bunch of teeth, if you will. All right, so we have Farin, who's in the 13th Congressional District, 9th Council District up in Harlem. And again, knowing the community districts is important. Dr. Blair, what are your districts?
My district is the 40th for the council, city council. It is the 9th congressional district. I live in the 43rd assembly district and the 20th state senate district.
Look at that, right? Because so a lot of people, and we talked about this, where people may only know their elected officials by name, if they know their elected officials by name. And so it's really important, at least as you are participating in this process, to also know the actual district lines, particularly as we're going in the redistricting process. The next section, the next activity is we want you to dig a little deeper, as Dr. Blair mentioned, and we have a community of interest survey. So you can, if you use QR codes, you can just put your phone up on the screen and use the code there. Or you can go to our redistricting page at clsj.org/redistricting, and you'll see the community of interest survey there. We want you to take that and tell us a little bit more about your community. This is extremely helpful to our research team as we begin the process, or as the research team begins the process of drawing lines or proposing to draw lines to keep communities together. But we need to know how you define what your community is. What are, Dr. Blair talked about shopping corridors, right? If you live in Bed-Stuy, you know that Fulton Street is a shopping corridor, and you can't imagine Fulton Street being in a different district other than in Bed-Stuy, right? If someone were to say to us that Fulton Street is Crown Heights, there'd be a fight in the street, over that, right? The same thing about, Flatbush Avenue or different parts of Nostrand. So we want to know more information about what constitutes the boundaries of your community. You'll also see questions in there about any trends about how your community has changed over the past couple of years. Maybe you've noticed that, like we all have noticed, there's lots of new apartment buildings, in your community, which means there's lots of new people. And do those new people that are coming in, is it a part of another grouping? You have a whole new strip of restaurants? Do you have Blink Fitness every other block? All of those things, because they're catering to the new folks coming in. But then telling us more. Dr. Blair, tell us how that specifically helps in helping to shape as we propose districts for the redistricting process from there.
So you start off with the current boundaries, which hopefully is along the major corridors. And then you sort of, if you want, there is I don't want to give that away. you have to come to the session. But you start off with the you start off with the maps, and that's your boundaries, which defines your community, etc. And then you you sort of look for any key new information that you have in terms of any influx in languages, any influx language minorities, any influx in new schools, because we have seen some development in new schools, and sort of try to draw a circle around those and incubate those. And because you may not have enough for a whole new district this time around, but you probably can grow it for another district, another seat the next time around.
And Dr. Blair, I think we should also remind everyone that while this is also important for Joy, and actually I'm seeing a note in the chat that it's bringing up a 404. Are you able to grab that?
Yep.
Thank you. One of the other things that we need to remember is that our ability to enforce voting rights, our ability to enforce civil rights is all related and connected to our ability to have equitably drawn districts. If we do not have districts that properly represent us, if the data, for example, upon which district lines are drawn, the census data horrifically undercounts us, which is has been the case, then our ability to go into court and defend our right to the Voting Rights Act, to defend our right to equitable access to the ballot becomes severely hampered, and it weakens our ability to do so. And so when we're talking about living in a time where, like right now, where not only were there entire campaigns that essentially fomented the great big lie, as Representative Hakeem Jeffries calls it, that this most recent presidential election was stolen, for example. And upon said lie, literally hundreds of people swarmed the Capitol in an attempted coup d'etat, an overthrow of the peaceful transfer of power. What we are now seeing in response to that, and all of the attenuating lies that circulated around that, is this notion that we have to fix voting because there are too many people who helped to rig this election. And so we're seeing a rash of new state legislation coming across the plate that are literally attempting to draw back and claw back a number of the advances that we were able to make in voting rights recently. So all of these things are interconnected, and all of these things rely on active and engaged population. And as I often remind people, our community only got right to access the vote with the Voting Rights Act, the right to literally register to vote without facing lynch mobs and literacy tests 57 years ago. So if you know someone who's 57 years or older, or if you yourself are 57 years or older, you're literally older than integration and our access to the ballot in this country. And there are a lot of people who are very upset about that. And as a result of that, if we have to have a community, New York, communities of African descent across the country, although our heart is with New York City, specifically Brooklyn, but I'm biased. But if we have to have a population of Black community members who not only know this information, but know how to apply it, who are willing to get into the weeds, and who are willing to advocate and fight for our communities to have equitable representation. The reality is right now, the courts are very hostile to our communities. They have been intentionally packed with judges who are intentionally hostile to the many of the needs that our communities would raise. And so these are the types of systems that traditionally we have been excluded from, which is why it is so vitally important for us to have access and to understand this information and engage further. Joy?
So Dr. Blair, we have one question. While I know the projections that you shared are projections and estimates, which we want to give, people, the disclaimer about that. We don't have the official 2020 census data yet. So these are projections based upon, as Dr. Blair mentioned earlier, the census does other surveys, as well as the state and city does information that sort of gives us an estimate of what our numbers will be. But the question that we have in the chat is, are Black people leaving the state, or are they just moving around in the borough?
So both for a number of reasons. Like I said, people move for political, economic, and social reasons. So lots of people are moving from Brooklyn, for example, because the Brooklyn prices are through the roof, or was through the roof, and they're being pushed out in the Bronx appear to be cheaper. So economic reasons. Some people moved out of state for a number of reasons. One may say, I'm voting with my feet and it's a better quality of life there for the price that I have to pay. And so a lot of people moved to Jersey, but we also know that housing was not free enough, or at least this affordable housing concept or reasonably priced housing concept was not free enough. And so for individuals who had to be in homeless shelters, they were shipped to New Jersey as well. But for those who had this freedom of movement, if you will, they relocated in other boroughs.
Very powerful information. I was surprised that Black people moved to Staten Island.
No, don't be surprised. There's an example of communities of interest, right? They elected the first state assembly person, right, for Staten Island. So
yeah, that I'm just gonna ask you not to say that too loud.
Oh.
So that my husband is already looking for alternative places to move out of Brooklyn, and I can't tell him that there will be more Black people in Staten
very
Island.
well. 22%.
All right. So as the question was asked on whether or not information will be housed on our website, absolutely. Center for Law and Social Justice is the source and will be the source going forward of housing all of this information related to people of African descent participating in the redistricting process. That means educating you and providing information and resources and being a hub that you can consistently go back to get information on what is happening. So lastly, I want to share with you the different ways that you can get involved in the redistricting process. It was alluded to already about our 6-week training for the redistricting process. This conversation this afternoon was just a primer, just a teaser, if you will, of what is coming in terms of our in-depth 6-week course so that you can actually fully participate in the redistricting process. But there are a number of ways that you can get involved. We started first with making sure that you participate in the survey, which we shared, and make sure that if you can share that with people in your network as well, particularly if they are in New York State, just being particularly mindful of that we this project is particularly for New York State. So make sure that you share that information with people and look, having some technical difficulties here. Share with people in New York State. The website is clsj.org/redistricting. So you can go there. You'll also see there, we already have the RSVP up for the 6 weeks training course. In this course, I'm excited about this. In this course, you will get learn how to analyze census and election data for your advocacy efforts. And then ultimately learn how to use open source software to draw your own community maps. But it's really important to do the trainings leading up to learn how you take that data from the census and you are able to take the information such as a community of interest survey that we just sent around to be able to create districts that meet the criteria that Dr. Blair had shared before. This is important. Using the data also for advocacy purposes is important. Look, real estate developers use census data to determine their business model in terms of where to build apartments, where to build more housing. Businesses use census data to determine how many more dollar stores and Dollar Trees they're going to open in certain communities. And so we should be able, as heads of organizations who are advocating on behalf of people in our community, advocating for additional resources for childcare, advocating for additional resources for people who are experiencing homelessness, to be able to use that data to demonstrate the needs in our community is extremely important as well. And then also being able to participate in drawing the district lines for your community and giving the input on what boundaries constitute your community, making sure you don't have people cut off from their natural allies and people, that that we can use our political voice together. So you can go to clsj.org redistricting to sign up for that interactive course. So it's a hands-on interactive course where you will be learning how to manipulate all of that information on your own. Lorraine, any final thoughts?
Yes, I just want to say, can you hear me? I don't see myself, so I'm like trying
Yep.
to find. Okay, thank you. I just want to say again, I am so grateful that so many of you joined us. We were not sure what the interest level was going to be, and so we are thrilled to see that just about everyone who signed up for it actually attended the event, and that to me really does speak to the continuation of our interest as communities of African descent in making sure that we're clear about how the systems that govern and distribute resources or not within our communities are operating. Again, while this is New York City, New York State specific, please replicate this work. We, as a community, we often protest together. We often agonize and commiserate together, but we don't as frequently take time to examine the inner workings of these very same systems under which we all live. And that is something that must end. As I said at the beginning, the courts have proven to be increasingly hostile, which means rushing in with the litigation and filing an effective lawsuit may or may not be effective for us as it has been in the past. And it is vitally important, whether you're running into court here in New York or somewhere else to fight your good share of the fight, the reality is in addition to the in-court battles, there are the out-of-court battles. There is the how do I manipulate this system, which I did not create, which was not created for my benefit, but under which I'm living. How do I manipulate this system so that my people have access to the best resources and political representation that we can have to live our best life? So I'm very grateful for all of you who are here. Thank you for those who joined both in-state and out-of-state, upstate and downstate. We are excited about this work. And if you are learning about redistricting for the first time, that is okay. Like, this is supposed to be something that seems a little fuzzy. Why? Because we were literally excluded from learning about these systems since 1619. So we got a lot of time to make up. We're going to do it in a way that's effective, that allows all of our Black girl and Black boy magic to shine. And more than that, in a way that allows our excellence to shine. And I want to just give a huge shout of appreciation and thanks to Dr. Zalima Blair, who continues to carry the distinction of being the only professor at Medgar Evers College with both a JD and a PhD. As you can all see, she is very clear and is very knowledgeable about this work, and she has an extensive amount of experience. So thank you for your amazing research, Dr. Blair. We appreciate you. Joy, project coordinator, you know, like my heart is full, and I'm very grateful. And to Kiana, Della, and Edwin, and Esmeralda, our founding executive director, who had the nerve to sneak in here. And so we want to say hello to you, our founder, who retired literally a year and a few days ago. Thank you all for being here. Thank all of you, our community, for joining. We very much look forward to you signing up for the redistricting course. We have a lot of work to do. We are going to need your help, and we are going to need to have you bring other people from your community so that you can help us get done what needs to get done. And with that, we will let you go for the rest of your afternoon.
Enjoy, everyone.